You're listening to the Purpose Pursuit podcast with me, Hannah Miller. This episode is free to access. This podcast is here for women who are in the middle of life, who are holding a lot and running on empty. They're ready for something to shift, but they don't know where to start. If that's you, start with my free 5-minute What's Next for Me check-in. It'll help you pinpoint what's keeping you stuck and what to focus on first. You'll find it in the show notes. So today's episode is born out of a shed load of personal experience because life can sometimes be very full and we've got a lot going on, or we've got a big life event happening that's painful and difficult. And yet in the midst of that, we've still got to communicate clearly. We've got to communicate clearly at work. We've got to communicate at home. And sometimes that can be really hard. And today's episode is not a kind of, how to be brilliant in all situations and communicate perfectly, whatever's going on. It's more about how do we do a good job of protecting our connection with people and communicating what we need to when we're depleted or when we don't have our full capacity, and we can find ourselves slipping into some situations that we look back on and go, that could have gone better. And I've definitely had situations at work and at home and with friends and in any other, environment I can think of, where because of my reduced capacity or the fact there's a lot going on, my communication has been suboptimal in those situations. I've also been on the receiving end of suboptimal communication because of tiredness, depletion, other things going on, or things being taken a different way. This is about us trying to not snap, not react, not just sitting and crying in a situation and wondering what's wrong with us. It's about trying to do a better job about being clear, about being kind, about being boundaried around this goes on. And, these are the sort of things I'm talking about. It's when there are times when my teenager asks me something, he gets a bit of a sharp response from me because my brain is really full and I'm a bit like, oh, not another thing, when actually it was just one thing I was being asked in that moment and I'm reacting out of the full bucket of stuff. Or at work, you spend way too long composing an email that really shouldn't have taken that long because you're overthinking the way you want to write it, or you do the opposite and you shoot something off that you should have thought about a little bit more, and that's come from a reaction or a depletion that's just kind of meaning that you're either fogging up or you are bouncing things out too quickly and irrationally. There's also the fact that some of you might feel that your communication isn't clear, not so much because of emotion, but brain fog that can sometimes come in the middle years of life. Actually, it can come pregnancy fog. There's other times where we can feel foggy. When we're grieving, we can get foggy. When we're under a lot of pressure, we can get foggy. And when we do, we then find ourselves going blank or rambling. I've seen those two things happen before, where someone just looks like, they've lost the ability to advocate for themselves or to speak clearly, or their mind has just gone blank, or they start to ramble and they use 100 words when they could have used one. So these are some of the problems that we can have, in what it can look like. And I think, how it shows up at work is in those different ways. It could be over rewriting emails or sending one off too quick. It can be being too blunt, too vague. It can be that you start to avoid really hard conversations or you go into them full pelt. It can be the rambling or the blanking. So those are what tends to happen at work. At home, it's a bit more potentially ramped up in a different kind of way. Again, depending on who you are as a person, it could be that you go really silent and you're so depleted or you're so overwhelmed that you withdraw and you pull into yourself and you don't say what you need or what the problem is. Or you're snappy. That's what I'm more likely to do, is to be a bit snappy or to say things out of a place of dysregulation or a previous incident that's not the thing. I think I've told this story before, but I was called out by my then 8-year-old many years ago when a woman was incredibly rude to me in a previous job. She was actually somebody with, real mental health challenges, but the onslaught was very, very personal on this particular meeting. And I got back in the car with my son and he said something to me and I snapped at him about it, and he said to me, you're not cross with me, mummy, you're still cross with about how that lady's made you feel. And he absolutely called me out. And that was ineffective communication with my little boy, who was able to see that my response was coming from a previous situation and not the one I was in. And I wonder whether you've ever done that too. You may have done. Maybe you also find yourself bringing a harsh energy to those ordinary requests, like I mentioned before. You know, somebody's just asked you to do something and you've been a bit more harsh or reactive to that normal request because of a previous or a resentment or a full load that just tips you over the edge, or you're using a tone that's not very helpful because your body's already totally overloaded. It's so funny how sometimes we can find ourselves doing that and we don't always spot it in ourselves, but it's easy to see when we can see it in somebody else, and we don't always notice we're doing until it's too late, and then by which time we're then being defensive about it because we kind of want to prove that it wasn't really who we are. Now, this is normal, okay? All of this is quite normal. It doesn't make it okay, but it is normal. You know, going back to the thought, I'm just going to read out a little bit of research here. Burnout is described as this occupational phenomenon that is when we have chronic workplace stress that's not successfully managed. It includes exhaustion, mental distance or cynicism, and reduced efficacy. So when we have that reduced efficacy that comes from burnout, our communication will not be optimal. Stress impairs your working memory. So when there is too much stress in the system, your working memory, i.e. the bit that's working on here and now, the responsiveness, your cognitive flexibility is reduced. So that's why when we are tired, it is evidence that we will struggle to listen, we struggle to think on our feet or respond with nuance. I have noticed this in situations that I can normally handle. Like when my mum had first died and I was in some certain situations like going to the shops and choosing food, I was literally like, I don't know how to do this. And my cognitive flexibility was just not present. So please have some compassion on yourself. This is normal. And it doesn't take a scientist to tell you that sleep deprivation is an issue here. I mean, the research backs it up, but sleep deprivation, whether that's because your sleep has been disturbed through too much on your mind, whether you're in perimenopause and you're waking early because of it, or whether you're younger and you've got a young child, or whether you're just somebody who struggles with your sleep because of stress or insomnia, stress is associated with then increased emotional reactivity. They did this test where they put a number of couples through a bit of sleep deprivation and a whole load of couples where they had really good night's sleep, and they tracked their difficult conversations over that period. And go figure, those that had been sleep deprived had much more combative conversations than those that had not. And, you know, there was a large number in this, so there was a lot of evidence in it. So we've got less tolerance for stress, our judgment is impaired, and your conflict is likely to be worse when you've been sleep deprived. So that is why sometimes it makes sense to just say, do you know what, let's go to bed and talk about this when we're less tired. And that is why sometimes conversations go a bit awry late at night. I don't know whether that's ever happened in your home, but ours have. And sometimes, you know, people say don't go to bed angry. Well, it's not a good idea to go to bed angry, but it's also not a good idea to try and solve a problem at night when you're really, really tired, when you maybe need to find a way to put a lid on it and come back to it so that it doesn't completely explode. And go first. So I'm going to give you 5 shifts, okay? 5 shifts that you can think about as little tools that might help you with this. So 5 shifts that we can use to help our communication be better when we are depleted, when we are sleep deprived, when we've got mental fogginess and we don't feel that we're at our best. These are some shifts. So the first shift is, rather than just doing and performing, it's stopping and anchoring. Now, by anchoring, I mean taking a moment to pay attention to you. So going back to that moment where I snapped at my son, if I'd have stopped and anchored for 60 seconds and thought about what state I'm in, maybe I would have handled it better. So ask yourself, what are you feeling? Ask yourself, what is the purpose of this conversation? And do I have the energy to have it and to stay in the conversation? And check in with yourself, what state am I in? What outcome matters here? And should we go? Should we no go? Or should we keep it short? It might be that if you're about to get into what could be quite a challenging conversation, it might be that you actually think, I don't think having this conversation right now is wise. Now, wisdom sometimes is saying, I would really like to have this conversation with you, but I don't think now is the right moment. I've got a lot on my mind and I want to give you my full attention. Now, you may, as a leader, have to prefer what your colleague wants from you if they need to have that conversation and offload right now. But you need to check in with yourself and think, how much capacity have I got for this? How much attention do I need to pay of myself in this so that I handle it well? If I'm feeling more emotionally sensitive, I need to know that and check in with myself so that I can manage that as best in that moment. I'm sure we've all had those moments. I can think of one where I could feel myself in a meeting actually that had gone really badly in a previous workplace, and quite a brutal thing was said across the room to me at quite a fragile time in my life. And I'm sitting there and I can feel that I'm trying so hard not to cry, because I am a crier. Don't cry. And I'm like squeezing my own hands under the table to try and, when you're trying to cause yourself a little bit of pain so that you don't cry. And a colleague of mine just kind of like squeezed my hand under the table as if to say, it's okay, we'll get there. You've got to check in with yourself in those moments. And you might need to, excuse yourself, go to the bathroom, clear your head. But you've got it in you to manage better than you think you probably can, especially when you are aware of what you're dealing with. The problem comes when we go into something we haven't thought about what state we're in. When my son needs me late at night to talk about something and I am really depleted, if I take a moment to go, you are really tired, but your son needs you. Come on, you can find it in you to do this, dig deep. I'm more likely to do well than to just go into it with a slightly like, I shouldn't really be doing this, I'm not in it. So even just checking in with yourself. And where you can, when you really don't have the capacity, is to say, actually, I think I could do with waiting to have this conversation for another time, and like helping that person respect your boundary and to manage that, as best you can. So the next shift is to, rather than say everything, to say the essential thing. I think that's another challenge that we have, is that it's really easy for us, for some people especially, to, myself included, to go around the houses in things and to say too much. And I think sometimes when we're depleted, we compensate by talking more. There are people, that you'll know them at work, you'll have been it potentially yourself, and a bit of a weakness is you go round the houses or you say more than's necessary. You start to over-talk, over-explain, and then you start to emotionally leak. This is really not a good idea. And actually, if you are briefer and more to the point, you are less likely to do those things. So at work, that is about like having one message, one ask, or one step, one thing, rather than giving a whole spiel around it. Here is the decision, or here is what we need from you, or here's what I think we should revisit. Whatever it might be clear and front load it so that you stop yourself from going into this over-explaining mode. It's okay to stop and to not speak. And by the way, communication is also listening as well as speaking. At home, that might be, I'm too tired to discuss all of this really well right now. In fact, I said that the other day. I was cooking the dinner and I could feel myself. A few things had happened, and one of my children came in to talk to me, and I said, and he was actually asking me, was I okay, and so on, and I just said, I can't do this right now. And that's okay to just say, actually, I'm too tired to do this. I don't want to go there, or I do want to talk, but let's do it this way, or can we do it after dinner, or can we do it tomorrow, or this is the thing. So I think being clear and not over talking is another really important shift that we can make. We can shift from reacting to responding later. Not everything requires as much of an immediate response as we think it does. We live in such an urgent response culture. I want urgent responses. My kids want urgent responses. Colleagues want urgent responses. Clients want urgent responses. We can often feel like everything is now, when the vast majority of things can wait if we're willing to sit with that little bit of, tension. And sometimes waiting might mean that it goes so much better by waiting. If I want to have a late night convo because I'm feeling emotional and my husband says, I don't think we should do this now, it can really put me out. But then when we have that conversation whilst walking the dog the next day and it goes 10 times better, I've got to admit that he was right on that occasion and I was not. And I didn't die by having, unmet emotional conversation late at night. Actually, it went better. So there are times when we need to think, for either your sake or even the person in front of you, this is not the moment. So I want to answer that, but not quickly. Or just simply saying, I need some time to think about this before I respond. That is okay. That is not manipulative. That is absolutely fine to do. Or let me come back to you this afternoon. Or I'm not in a great state to talk about this right now. All of those are legitimate ways to stop yourself from reacting. So pulling back and just responding later can be really important, especially if you're somebody who really values, like you value collaboration, you value connection, or you're aware that you could either emotionally leak or you could become a bit harsh or rash in your response. I mean, I know what I fall into in this situation, and actually just building in a little bit of time. Sometimes, you know what, it's only 5 minutes, and even just those 5 minutes can work. Another shift is trying to move to the idea of a soft start rather than a harsh start. This comes from the Gottman Institute. Sometimes difficult conversations, that when they start sort of too harsh at the beginning, it really impacts how the whole conversation goes. So if at home I said something like, "You never help me when I ask you," that's what you might call a harsh startup. Or at work, if I said, "This isn't good enough," that's a harsh startup. And the trouble with harsh startup and the use of always and never and those kind of phrases is people respond with defensiveness. And it's quite an emotional way to speak to someone anyway. So if we go a more gentle approach, that doesn't mean we beat around the bush, rather than being critical or explosive, and the runway is a bit more gentle, people are more open to hear the thing that you want to give them critical feedback on, or that could be an emotional conversation. So rather "you never help," it's "I'm feeling overloaded and I need us to look at how we share the work out between us." That is way less combative and is a softer startup rather than "you never help me when I ask," which makes somebody pull back and the conversation doesn't go so well. And the work example of "this isn't good enough, redo it," or "this does not meet the standard," I think we need to revisit this. Here are some specific gaps that I'm seeing in the work. That is a softer way of saying this needs to be better than it was. And it doesn't sound like rocket science, but the thing is, when we are busy and when we are stretched and when we are emotional, and when emotional, I mean the whole range of emotions. I don't mean tears. I mean a sense of heightened emotion, and that could be a very different emotion depending on who you are listening. We might go for that harsh startup rather than, if I just choose my words more carefully, this is going to go very differently. Like if I go to my son's bedroom and say, "It's always a tip in here. Why does it look like this again?" That is a harsh startup that gets a harsh response. And I know that doesn't help matters for me, for him, for anybody. And it just doesn't help. And the same at work. You know, if I respond to a harsh email with a harsh response, it just escalates things. And a final shift is, rather than just endlessly being available, which I'm sure loads of you are in every environment you're in, you drop what you're doing, you make yourself available, you communicate your limits, because actually every one of us has a limit. And when we communicate limits or communicate boundaries, it also allows other people to do the same. So it's about being a bit clearer rather than, again, reacting because you feel under pressure, going, "Oh, you're asking me to do more things, I can't do this, I can't handle it." We're a bit clearer. So we say, "I can review this today, but I can't rewrite it from scratch." So again, that's communicating a boundary. I can give you 10 minutes, but that's all I've got right now. I've been trying to use that a lot more with people, saying, "I can give you this amount of time. This is what I've got. If you want more, that's not what I've got." And being clear around expectations rather than an unlimited amount of time. Again, it's not rocket science, but it can help set up a conversation for success. Or saying, "I'm actually not the best person to own this going forward. I don't think I'm the right person for this. I haven't got the capacity or the bandwidth at the moment. And I think before I get involved, I should step back." Finally, at home, that could be things like, "I can listen now, but I can't solve this with you tonight. It's too late." Or, "Can I have 20 minutes to myself and then I'll be more present for this conversation?" That's another really good one, especially when you're dealing with your own children. "I want to talk about this, but when I'm less reactive." If we could get some of that nailed, I think some of the stuff that we're carrying because of the everyday overload that we're in will not just constantly bleed into these important conversations. So I hope those shifts help you think about this a bit different. And there might be one that is particularly where you're at. And, if maybe pick one work conversation or one home conversation this week to be more mindful in and more self-aware in, and think to yourself, what state am I in? What's the outcome we're looking for? What's the one sentence I need to say today? What's the one sentence that needs to be clear in this conversation? and enable yourself to have these conversations even when your bandwidth is stretched or capacity is overloaded, in a way that essentially has more wisdom about it. Because we all want that, and we all want to do a better job of the things that count. I hope that's been helpful. And again, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic of how we do this well. And I hope you have a fantastic week ahead. Bye-bye for now.